So, risk is something that you see in all sorts of business. So what exactly is political risk? So this term political risk, it refers to the possibility that investors will lose or make more money than expected due to political conditions or events occurring in a country. So you can think of here as elections. You could think of it as revolutions, financial crises caused by regulatory risk, even things as big as regime change or something like Brexit. At a country level, so if you were advising a country on factors of political risk, you might talk about ways to mitigate it at the country level, changes in regulations or laws. At the firm level, you might think about activities as a firm. So maybe you choose a different entry mode. Instead of direct, you might come in the form of a joint venture, right? You may offshore your intellectual property if you're worried about intellectual property risk in a country. So there's different decisions that you can make in terms of mitigation. And then once you've built the mitigation in your model, you can think about the ultimate decision. Do I enter or not enter into this particular business climate? Do I expand my investment in this place or not, depending on what lays ahead? Yeah. Andrew?
Yeah, so where I would say the failure tends to occur in most companies is not really on the mitigation or business decisions. And I believe that people are good at thinking about these two latter issues when trained to work in organizations, when trained to think about strategy, when trained to think about international business, and when experienced in those functions as well.
Yeah.
The major problem is in the analysis side.
Yeah.
And there's two issues related to this. Number one, there's just not the core skills to undertake those analyses. But the second thing is that there's a need for unlearning. And what we end up doing is we end up relying on fairly simple metrics, often very gross metrics, and we often get caught in a pattern of listing rather than analyzing.
This is the port that we're going to talk about, the Hambantota Port. In today's case, that we read, and if this is the new port that was to be constructed in the president's home state. It had been a smaller port before, but as the Colombo port started to run out of capacity and also had difficulty expanding into other businesses because of, sort of in an urban environment, there was a decision made to seek financing to expand the Hambantota Port and to look for investment in that. This particular port has been in the news a lot recently because of a term that's been associated with Chinese Belt and Road investment, which is called this debt trap. And if you read the New York Times or you read discussions about this, one way people talk about this Sri Lankan port was that Sri Lanka was essentially tricked by China into getting into a predatory deal that eventually meant that they could not pay back the debt because the terms on the debt were so high, and then China was able to take over the port from them.
What's really interesting is that some of the large textile garment manufacturing firms from Sri Lanka, such as Brandex or Hella Clothing, have actually made investments in Africa in Belt and Road countries. So on one side, we see the Belt and Road as potentially jeopardizing Sri Lanka's autonomy with respect to its port functions. At another level, these companies are benefiting from it in their internationalization.
So the first question we want you to see here is, was the Hambantota Port a good idea? And we want you to think about yes or no, and then in your breakout groups, decide why it was a good idea. And we don't want you to just think about it from the perspective of the Chinese government. We also want to think about it from the perspective of Mahinda Rajapaksa, the president of Singapore, and then also for the Sri Lankan Port Authority overall. This was a bad investment. Looks like David.
Yeah, I was concerned about the stability of the country. And kind of what was going to be the effect if someone else took power or refused to leave, if they all of a sudden were going to say, yeah, this is not what we want. The last guy did this, or, it's done. And so I was a little concerned about the stability of Sri Lanka.
Why did you think this was a good investment? If you were a private investor, why'd you say yes?
Yeah. I voted yes.
Okay.
Why?
And why'd you say yes?
Because generally speaking, roughly there are over 12 million business entities, companies running business across Chinese market. According to Chinese statistics office, over 13 million companies. So that's why, so looking at the practice and tradition, how Chinese companies, they go into the overseas markets, right? So the premise is two countries, they reach an agreement or sign any document. Upon that basis, Chinese government, they would be very open to go into that market. So with that sense, right, with that idea, I think it is very safe kind of to put your money into this construction. Yeah.
China represent like a savior for Sri Lanka because financially speaking, because Western countries, they refuse to lend the money, and then so it's like a win-win situation for China and Sri Lanka government.
From a
Roy, if you want to add something, I think.
Yeah.
Just one thing, that when you give the money, you're also able to choose the contractor, choose the labor, choose the steel, where the steel is going to come from, et cetera, et cetera. So perhaps China also not only gives the money, but a lot of that money is going to come back to them in terms of costs, return. So that was another possible reason why China might say, yeah, sure, why not?
We fear ownership, but ownership is not ownership for the port. And what I mean by that is this port is part of Sri Lanka's sovereign territory. And one of the things that we're always concerned of as a foreign investor, in this case, China is a foreign investor, is the threat of expropriation, either expropriation of revenues or expropriation of the physical asset. So even though the Chinese government might nominally own the port and they might be able to extract some of the financial earnings, if any, from the port, the reality is they never truly own it because it falls in Sri Lanka's, jurisdiction, territorial jurisdiction.
It seems to me that the Chinese companies and the Chinese government, they themselves, it looks like they ended up getting a raw deal, because they ended up being invested in a project that was never fully developed, holding on to a territory that of an investment that really never reached fruition, and having to take it over because that was the only way they could recoup some of their losses on this project, right? And so then they got hit with this international hit for it, but also ended up holding what I think you're right, Andrew, like a very risky venture that's fully not fully developed business-wise, and that can be taken back from them. And I think I think they misjudged the political situation in Sri Lanka, that they didn't understand that the terms might change on them, and then they were too closely connected to Rajapaksa and too much invested in the idea that Rajapaksa would be able to hold on to power indefinitely. And I think that's sort of the really interesting story, is that even very savvy investors like China could end up in a situation like this where they're holding an asset that they don't really want. And I think that what I learned from this is just, for me as a reader of it, like how much nuance here is really important in understanding when we start throwing around terms like debt trap. I think that might be certainly the case in some of this, but clearly this to me is not a case study of that. That's having read it.
We at DCID are very grateful to have partnered with the National University of Singapore's Business School for this particular event. And as you see, there are clear intersections between business analytics, political institutions, international development, and so forth. And so we hope to continue to have conversations and to do more events like this where we can engage in conversation and elicit more ideas. I mean, I think we have a number of people on this call who will be able to continue to influence in this realm.